The morning sun painted the London streets in golden light as Jason Statham stepped out of his quiet apartment building. The air was fresh and cool with a gentle breeze that made the perfect weather for a long walk. Jason stretched his arms above his head and took a deep breath of the clean morning air. Today felt different somehow. It felt peaceful and calm in a way that made him smile without thinking about it. Bruno was already waiting by the front door with his tail wagging slowly back and forth. The big German shepherd had thick brown and black fur that shined in the sunlight. His dark eyes were bright and alert as he looked up at his owner with pure love and trust. Bruno had been Jason's best friend for over 5 years now, and they understood each other perfectly without needing to speak. Jason reached down and rubbed Bruno's head gently behind his ears. The dog closed his eyes and leaned into the touch with a soft, happy sound. This was their favorite time of day when the world belonged just to them. No cameras or movie sets or people asking for autographs. Just a man and his dog enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. They walked slowly down the quiet sidewalk with Bruno staying close to Jason's left side. The dog never pulled on his leash or ran ahead. He had perfect manners and knew exactly how to behave in public. People often stopped Jason to say how well-trained and beautiful Bruno was. The dog seemed to understand the compliments and would sit up straighter with pride. The neighborhood was waking up around them in the most peaceful way. An old man in a brown sweater was watering colorful flowers in his small front garden. He waved at Jason and Bruno as they passed by and called out good morning in a friendly voice. 2 young mothers were pushing baby strollers and talking quietly about their plans for the day. Their babies were sleeping peacefully under soft blankets. A small cafe on the corner was just opening its doors. The owner was setting up tables and chairs outside on the sidewalk. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread drifted through the air, making Jason's stomach rumble quietly. He made a mental note to stop there on the way back home for breakfast. Bruno stopped to sniff around a large oak tree that grew beside the sidewalk. His nose worked carefully over the bark and roots as he gathered information about all the other dogs who had been there before him. Jason waited patiently and watched a group of sparrows hopping around looking for crumbs near a park bench. They continued walking past a small playground where a few early morning joggers were stretching before their runs. The swings moved gently in the breeze even though no children were playing yet. It was still too early for most families to be outside. This quiet time belonged to people like Jason who enjoyed the peace before the busy day began. Jason wore simple clothes that made him look like any other person out for a morning walk. His black t-shirt and comfortable jeans were nothing special. Most people who saw him probably had no idea they were looking at a famous movie star. Jason preferred it this way. These morning walks were his escape from the crazy world of Hollywood and fame. Bruno suddenly became alert and looked down the street with his ears pointed forward. His body became tense as he sensed something approaching. Jason followed his dog's gaze, but saw nothing unusual yet. Dogs had much better hearing than humans, and Bruno often noticed things long before Jason did. The peaceful morning air was about to be broken by the sound of loud motorcycle engines in the distance. Neither Jason nor Bruno knew that their quiet walk was about to become something very different. The calm and safety they felt would soon be tested in a way that would change everything about their perfect morning together. The peaceful morning quiet was suddenly shattered by the roar of powerful motorcycle engines echoing through the narrow streets. The sound grew louder and louder as 3 big motorcycles came speeding around the corner. Their engines made such a terrible noise that car alarms started going off and dogs began barking from inside nearby houses. The first motorcycle was the biggest and shiniest of all. It was painted bright red with flames on the sides and had chrome pipes that gleamed in the sunlight. The man riding it had long greasy hair that flew behind him in the wind. His name was Rick, and he was the leader of this small group of troublemakers. Rick wore a black leather jacket covered with metal studs and patches from different motorcycle clubs. His arms were covered in dark tattoos that told stories of fights and trouble from his past. He had a thick beard that was dirty and unkempt. His eyes were small and mean, looking like someone who enjoyed causing problems for other people. Behind Rick rode his two followers on smaller but equally loud motorcycles. Pete was a thin man with nervous eyes who always agreed with whatever Rick said. He had short brown hair and wore a denim jacket with holes in it. Pete was not naturally mean, but he was too scared of Rick to ever disagree with him. The third man was Mike, who was bigger and stronger than Pete, but not as smart. Mike had a shaved head and wore a leather vest with no shirt underneath. His arms were huge from lifting weights, but his brain was not as developed as his muscles. Mike laughed at everything Rick did, even when it was not funny. These three men spent most of their time riding around the city looking for ways to cause trouble and get attention. They thought being loud and rude made them look tough and important. Rick especially loved showing off in front of his friends by doing things that would scare or upset other people. The motorcycles slowed down as they entered the quiet residential area where Jason and Bruno were walking. Rick looked around with his mean eyes, searching for something or someone to bother. He saw the old man watering his flowers and thought about driving through his garden. He saw the young mothers with their baby strollers and considered revving his engine to wake up the sleeping babies. But then Rick noticed something even better for his cruel games. He saw a man walking with a beautiful big dog down the sidewalk ahead of them. The dog looked strong and well cared for, which made Rick angry for reasons he could not explain. Rick had always hated people who had nice things or seemed happy with their lives. Rick turned to his friends and pointed at Jason and Bruno with a nasty smile spreading across his face. Pete and Mike looked where he was pointing and saw the peaceful scene of a man enjoying a morning walk with his dog. They could not understand why this would interest Rick, but they knew better than to question their leader. The three motorcycles pulled over to the side of the street and parked near where Jason and Bruno were walking. Rick turned off his engine, and the sudden silence felt strange after all the noise. Pete and Mike also stopped their bikes and waited to see what Rick had planned. Rick climbed off his motorcycle and stretched his arms like a predator preparing to hunt. His boots were heavy black leather with metal buckles that clinked when he walked. He adjusted his leather jacket and ran his fingers through his greasy hair as he prepared to cause trouble for two innocent victims who had done nothing wrong. Bruno sensed the danger immediately and moved closer to Jason's side. Rick walked toward Jason and Bruno with slow, confident steps, like a hunter approaching his prey. His heavy boots made loud sounds on the concrete sidewalk that echoed between the quiet houses. Every step he took was meant to show that he owned this street and could do whatever he wanted to anyone he met. Jason noticed the biker walking toward them, but did not think much about it at first. Many people liked to meet Bruno because he was such a handsome and friendly dog. Jason expected the man might want to pet Bruno or ask what kind of dog he was. This happened often during their morning walks, and Jason was always happy to talk about his beloved companion. Bruno felt something very different, though. Dogs have special senses that humans do not have, and Bruno could smell the meanness and anger coming from Rick. The big German shepherd moved behind Jason's legs and pressed his body against his owner for protection. Bruno's ears went back flat against his head, and his tail stopped wagging completely. Rick saw how the dog was acting scared, and this made him smile in a cruel way. He enjoyed seeing fear in animals and people because it made him feel powerful and important. Rick had been picking on weaker creatures since he was a small child and had never learned that this was wrong. When Rick got close enough to Jason and Bruno, he stopped walking and looked down at the beautiful dog with hate in his eyes. Bruno was everything Rick was not. The dog was loved and cared for and had a good life with someone who treated him kindly. This made Rick feel jealous and angry, even though he could not understand why. Without any warning or reason, Rick lifted his heavy leather boot high in the air. The boot had metal pieces on it that made it even more dangerous as a weapon. Jason saw what was about to happen, but there was no time to move Bruno out of the way or protect him from the attack. Rick brought his boot down hard against Bruno's side with all the force he could put behind it. The sound of the kick was terrible and loud, like a piece of wood being broken in half. Bruno let out a sharp cry of pain and surprise as the kick knocked him sideways and sent him tumbling onto the hard sidewalk. The poor dog tried to get back up on his feet, but the pain in his ribs was too much. Bruno lay on his side breathing hard and whimpering softly. His beautiful brown eyes looked up at Jason with confusion and hurt, as if asking why someone would want to cause him pain when he had done nothing wrong. Rick threw back his head and laughed loudly at what he had done. The sound of his laughter was ugly and mean, like broken glass scraping against stone. He turned toward Pete and Mike, who were still standing by their motorcycles, and raised his arms in the air like he had just won a great victory. Pete and Mike looked shocked by what their leader had done. They had expected Rick to maybe yell at the dog or try to scare it, but they had not thought he would actually hurt an innocent animal. Both men felt uncomfortable watching Bruno suffer, but they were too afraid of Rick to say anything against him. Jason's face changed completely in that moment. All the peace and happiness from their beautiful morning walk disappeared and was replaced by something much darker and more dangerous. His hands slowly formed into tight fists, and his jaw muscles became hard as stone. Rick. Jason dropped to his knees beside Bruno and gently placed his hands on the injured dog's body. His touch was soft and careful as he checked to see how badly Bruno was hurt. The dog's breathing was heavy but steady, and Jason could tell that nothing was broken inside. Bruno would be okay, but he was definitely in pain from the cruel kick. Bruno looked up at Jason with those trusting brown eyes that said he knew his owner would make everything better. The dog tried to wag his tail just a tiny bit to show Jason that he was still okay and still loved him completely. This small brave gesture made Jason's heart break and his anger grow even stronger. Jason stood up slowly and turned to face Rick with eyes that looked like they could burn holes through steel. Every muscle in Jason's body was tight and ready for action. His breathing was controlled but deep, like a fighter preparing for the most important battle of his life. The peaceful morning man was gone, and something much more dangerous had taken his place. Rick was still laughing and celebrating his cruel act when he finally looked directly at Jason's face for the first time. The laughter died in Rick's throat like someone had turned off a radio. Something about this man's face seemed familiar, but Rick could not figure out what it was at first. The angry stranger had sharp features and intense eyes that seemed to see right through Rick's tough guy act. His jaw was strong and his shoulders were broad, like someone who spent time training his body to be a weapon. Rick had seen this face somewhere before, but his brain was too slow to make the connection right away. Jason took one step closer to Rick, and the biker finally realized who he was looking at. Rick's face went pale white, like someone had drained all the blood from his body. His mouth fell open, and his eyes grew wide with shock and fear. This was not just some random dog owner who he could push around and intimidate. This was Jason Statham, the famous action movie star who played the toughest fighters and most dangerous men in Hollywood. Rick had seen him in movies like The Transporter, where Jason fought entire groups of bad guys and won every time. He had watched him in the Fast and Furious movies, where Jason played characters who never backed down from a fight and always protected the people they cared about. Pete and Mike also recognized Jason now, and they quickly backed away from their friend Rick. They understood that Rick had just made the biggest mistake of his entire life by hurting the pet of one of the most dangerous-looking actors in the world. Both men wanted to get as far away as possible before the situation got worse. Rick tried to act like he was not afraid, but his hands started shaking and sweat began forming on his forehead. He had built his whole tough guy image on picking on people who were weaker than him or who would not fight back. He had never expected to face someone who made a living pretending to beat up bullies like him. Jason continued staring at Rick without saying a word. The silence was more frightening than any threat could have been. Rick could see the controlled rage in Jason's eyes and knew that the movie star was deciding exactly how to handle this situation. Every second that passed felt like an hour. Other people on the street had started to notice the tension between the two men. A few neighbors came out of their houses to see what was happening. Some of them recognized Jason and whispered to each other about seeing a famous person in their neighborhood. Others just sensed that something serious was about to happen. Rick looked around desperately for a way to escape, but he was trapped. His motorcycle was too far away, and Jason was blocking his path. Pete and Mike had abandoned him completely and were already getting ready to leave without him. For the first time in his life, Rick was completely alone, facing the consequences of his cruel actions. When Jason finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but filled with so much controlled anger that it made Rick's skin crawl with fear. Each word came out slowly and clearly, like bullets being loaded into a gun. The famous actor's British accent made every syllable sound even more dangerous and threatening than it already was. "You just kicked my dog," Jason said in that terrifyingly calm voice. "That was the stupidest thing you could have possibly done today." His eyes never left Rick's face, and the biker could see years of movie training in how Jason held himself ready for action. Every muscle in the actor's body was coiled like a spring waiting to be released. Rick tried to laugh off what he had done and act like it was no big deal. His voice cracked when he spoke, showing everyone how scared he really was inside. "Come on, man, it was just a joke," he said while taking a small step backward. "Dogs need to learn their place, you know." The words sounded stupid even to Rick as soon as they left his mouth. Jason's expression grew even darker when he heard Rick trying to make excuses for animal cruelty. "Bruno has never hurt anyone in his entire life," Jason replied, and his voice got slightly louder with each word. "He is the gentlest dog I have ever known, and you decided to hurt him because you thought it would be funny." Bruno had managed to stand up and was now pressing against Jason's leg for comfort and protection. The dog was still hurting from the kick, but he trusted his owner to handle this dangerous situation. Jason reached down and gently petted Bruno's head, while never taking his eyes off Rick, who was getting more nervous every second. Rick looked around, hoping his friends Pete and Mike would come help him, but they had moved even further away and were pretending not to know him. Both men had already started their motorcycles and were getting ready to leave their leader behind to face Jason's anger alone. Rick realized he had no backup and no escape route. The crowd of people watching the confrontation was growing larger by the minute. Some of them had their phones out and were recording everything that was happening. Rick could see the red recording lights and knew that videos of him kicking Bruno would probably end up all over the internet for everyone to see. An elderly woman walking her small white poodle stopped to watch what was happening. When she realized what Rick had done to Bruno, she shook her head in disgust and made a sound of disapproval. Her little dog seemed to understand the situation and growled softly at Rick while staying close to his owner for safety. A young father who had been jogging stopped running when he saw the crowd gathering. When someone explained that the biker had kicked the famous actor's dog, the father looked at Rick with pure hatred. The man had 2 dogs at home and could not imagine anyone being cruel enough to hurt an innocent animal for entertainment. Jason took another step closer to Rick, who was now trapped between the angry movie star and the crowd of disapproving neighbors. The biker's tough guy image was crumbling completely, as everyone could see how scared he was of facing the consequences for his actions. Rick's hands were shaking so badly now that he had to put them in his jacket pockets to hide them. Sweat was running down his face, even though the morning air was still cool and comfortable. His breathing was getting faster and more shallow, like someone having a panic attack. Jason could see that Rick was falling apart, but he was not finished teaching this bully a lesson yet. The actor had dealt with many bullies in his life and knew that they only understood consequences when those consequences were serious enough to make them change their behavior forever. Rick tried one more time to act tough, but his voice was weak and shaky. "Look, I said I was sorry, okay?" he whispered. "I did not know it was your dog." But Jason was not interested in hearing any more pathetic excuses from someone who thought hurting animals was acceptable entertainment. Jason stared at Rick with the kind of intense focus that had made him famous in action movies around the world. "So it would have been perfectly fine to kick someone else's dog?" he asked in that dangerously quiet voice. "You think hurting innocent animals is acceptable as long as the owner is not someone you recognize from television?" Rick opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out because he knew Jason was absolutely right. There was no good excuse for what he had done to Bruno. Kicking any dog was wrong and cruel, no matter who owned the animal. Rick had never thought about this before, because he had never been forced to face the consequences of his actions. The crowd around them continued to grow as more people heard about the confrontation between the famous actor and the biker who had hurt his dog. Some neighbors came out of their houses still wearing bathrobes and slippers because they did not want to miss seeing what would happen next. Others were walking by on their way to work and stopped when they saw the gathering. A teenage boy who recognized Jason from the movies whispered excitedly to his friend about seeing a real action star in their neighborhood. But when the boys learned what had happened to Bruno, their excitement turned to anger at Rick. Even young people understood that hurting animals was wrong and cowardly. Pete and Mike had finally given up on their leader completely and drove their motorcycles away down the street. The sound of their engines fading into the distance made Rick realize he was truly alone, with no friends to help him face Jason's anger. His tough guy act had cost him everything, including the loyalty of his own gang. Rick watched his friends disappear and felt more scared and lonely than he had ever felt in his entire life. He had always depended on Pete and Mike to make him feel important and powerful. Without them backing him up, Rick was just a scared bully who had made a terrible mistake. "Your friends seem much smarter than you are," Jason observed as he watched the motorcycles disappear around the corner. "They know when to stay out of trouble and when to abandon someone who has gone too far. Maybe you should have learned that lesson from them before you decided to hurt my dog." The comment about his friends abandoning him hit Rick harder than any physical punch could have. His pride was hurt almost as much as his fear was growing. Rick had built his whole identity around being the tough leader that other people followed and respected. Now everyone could see that he was nothing but a coward without his backup. A woman in a business suit who had been walking to the train station stopped to see what was happening. When she learned that Rick had kicked Jason's dog, she pulled out her phone and started recording the confrontation. "I want to make sure everyone sees what kind of person thinks it is fun to hurt animals," she said loudly enough for Rick to hear. More and more phones appeared in the crowd as people realized they were witnessing something that would probably become famous on social media. Rick could see all the cameras pointed at him and knew that his face and his cruel actions would be seen by thousands or maybe millions of people online. Rick tried to cover his face with his hands, but it was too late. Too many people had already recorded him kicking Bruno and then cowering in front of Jason Statham. His reputation was destroyed forever, and there was nothing he could do to fix it now. The morning sun was getting brighter and warmer, but Rick felt cold all over his body. He was trapped in the middle of a circle of angry people who all hated him for what he had done. Every face he looked at showed the same expression of disgust and disappointment. Jason could see that Rick was completely broken, but he was not ready to let the bully off easy yet. The actor wanted to make sure Rick learned a lesson that would stick with him for the rest of his life, so he would never hurt another innocent animal again. Bruno was feeling better now and had stopped whimpering from the pain of the kick. The brave dog seemed to understand that his owner was protecting him and that justice was being served to the mean man who had hurt him for no reason. Jason reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his expensive smartphone. The device looked small in his strong hands, but Rick knew it was about to become the most dangerous weapon the actor could use against him. Jason held the phone up and pointed the camera directly at Rick's sweating face while pressing the record button. "What is your name?" Jason asked in that calm but threatening voice while the camera captured every detail of Rick's frightened expression. "I want everyone who sees this video to know exactly who thinks it is entertaining to kick innocent dogs." The red recording light on the phone seemed to burn into Rick's eyes like a laser. Rick immediately tried to cover his face with both hands and turned away from the camera. "Hey, you cannot record me without my permission," he protested in a voice that sounded more like begging than demanding. His tough guy image was completely gone now, and everyone could see he was just a scared bully who did not like facing consequences. "Actually, I can record you," Jason replied with the first hint of a smile he had shown since the confrontation began. We are standing in a public place, and you just committed an act of animal cruelty in front of dozens of witnesses. I think people have the right to know what kind of person you really are." The crowd around them murmured their agreement with Jason's logic. Many of them had their own phones out and were also recording Rick from different angles. The biker was surrounded by cameras and had no way to hide from the consequences of his cruel actions anymore. Rick realized that videos of him kicking Bruno and then being confronted by Jason Statham would spread across social media faster than wildfire. His face and his cruelty would be seen by people all over the world. His job, his reputation, and his future were all in serious danger now. "Please do not post that video," Rick begged, and for the first time his voice sounded genuinely panicked instead of just scared. "I have a job at the auto repair shop, and my boss will fire me if he sees what I did. My girlfriend will probably leave me too if she finds out I hurt a dog." Jason continued recording without lowering the phone. "You should have thought about all of those consequences before you decided to hurt Bruno," he said calmly. "Actions have results, and now you are learning what that means. Maybe next time you will think twice before you hurt someone who cannot defend themselves." An old man with a walking cane pushed through the crowd to get closer to Rick. The elderly gentleman had kind eyes, but his voice was firm and disapproving when he spoke. "I fought in wars to protect people like you. And this is how you use your freedom," he said sadly, "by hurting innocent animals for your own amusement." Rick tried to explain himself to the old veteran, but his words came out confused and desperate. "It was not supposed to be a big deal," he stammered. "I just thought it would be funny to scare the dog a little bit. I did not mean to hurt him so badly." "But Bruno did get hurt badly," Jason interrupted while still recording. "And you did not care about that when you were laughing about it afterward. You only care now because you got caught and have to face the consequences of your cruelty." A woman holding a small child pointed at Rick with anger in her eyes. "How can you call yourself a man when you pick on creatures that cannot fight back?" she demanded. "My little boy loves dogs, and he would never hurt one even though he is only 5 years old. You are worse than a child." Rick looked around desperately for someone in the crowd who might defend him or at least show him some sympathy. But every face he saw showed the same expression of disgust and disappointment. The entire neighborhood had turned against him because of his cruel actions. The teenage boys who had been excited to see Jason Statham were now looking at Rick like he was the worst person they had ever encountered. One of them shook his head and said loudly, "Man, you are seriously messed up if you think hurting dogs is cool." Rick felt smaller and more ashamed with every passing minute. He had never expected so many people to care so much about one dog. In his selfish world, he had thought most people would either ignore what he did or maybe even think it was funny like his friends usually did. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood that Jason Statham was confronting someone who had kicked his dog. People began arriving from blocks away to witness the confrontation and show their support for the famous actor and his injured pet. The crowd grew larger and more angry as each new person learned what Rick had done to innocent Bruno. An elderly woman with silver hair and a bright floral dress pushed her way through the crowd while holding the leash of her small poodle named Princess. The old lady had been walking her dog when she heard about the situation and came immediately to see what was happening. Her wrinkled face was red with anger when she looked at Rick. "I saw exactly what you did to that beautiful German shepherd," she said to Rick while pointing her finger at him like a sword. "My princess would never hurt a fly just like this gentleman's dog. How could you be so mean and cruel to an animal that was just enjoying a peaceful walk with his owner?" Princess the poodle seemed to understand the situation and growled softly at Rick while staying close to her owner's legs for protection. Even the small dog knew that Rick was a bad person who could not be trusted around animals or decent people. A young father wearing jogging clothes had stopped his morning run when he saw the crowd gathering. He was holding the hand of his 6-year-old daughter, who had insisted on coming to see what was happening. When the father learned that Rick had kicked Jason's dog, his face became dark with anger. "I do not want people like you in our neighborhood," the father said sternly while pulling his daughter closer to his side. "We have children and pets here who deserve to feel safe when they go outside. You are the kind of person who makes good families want to move away to protect their loved ones." The little girl looked up at Rick with confused eyes and asked her father in a loud voice, "Why did the mean man hurt the doggy, Daddy? Dogs are supposed to be our friends, right?" Her innocent question made several people in the crowd shake their heads sadly at Rick's cruelty. A group of teenagers who had been skateboarding in a nearby park came over to see what all the excitement was about. When they learned that Rick had hurt Jason Statham's dog, they were shocked and disgusted. One of the boys, who was about 16 years old, spoke for the whole group. "Dude, that is seriously not cool," he said to Rick while shaking his head. "Even we know better than to hurt animals. And we are just kids. You are like an adult man, and you should know way better than that. What is wrong with you?" The teenagers pulled out their phones and started recording Rick from different angles. They wanted to make sure their friends on social media would see what kind of person thinks it is acceptable to kick dogs. Rick realized that his cruel actions would soon be known by young people all over the city. A middle-aged woman who worked as a veterinarian at the local animal hospital pushed through the crowd when she heard that a dog had been injured. She knelt down beside Bruno and gently examined him to make sure he was not seriously hurt. Her professional touch was gentle and reassuring. "This poor baby is going to have some bruising and soreness, but nothing seems to be broken," she announced to the crowd. "He is very lucky that he is such a strong, healthy dog, or this could have been much worse." She looked at Rick with the kind of hatred that only people who dedicate their lives to helping animals can feel toward animal abusers. Jason was watching the community come together to support Bruno and condemn Rick's behavior. The actor felt proud of these neighbors who cared enough to stand up for an innocent animal. Their response gave him an idea for how to handle this situation in the most effective way possible. A businessman in an expensive suit who lived in one of the nearby apartments had come downstairs to see what was causing all the commotion outside his building. When he learned what Rick had done, he pulled out his business card and handed it to Jason with a serious expression. "I am a lawyer, and if you want to press charges against this man for animal cruelty, I will represent you for free," he said loudly enough for Rick to hear. "What he did to your dog was not just morally wrong, it was also illegal, and he should face the full consequences under the law." Rick heard the word lawyer and felt his knees go weak with fear. He had not realized that kicking Bruno might be against the law. The possibility of going to jail or having to pay huge fines made him feel sick to his stomach. His simple act of cruelty was turning into the biggest nightmare of his entire life. More people kept arriving as news of the confrontation spread through social media and text messages. Rick was now surrounded by at least 50 angry neighbors who all wanted to see justice served for Bruno's suffering. Jason looked at the crowd of angry neighbors surrounding Rick and realized this was the perfect moment to teach the biker a lesson he would never forget. Instead of using violence like his movie characters might do, Jason decided to use something much more powerful. He would use the community's anger and Rick's fear to create real change in the bully's life. "Here is what is going to happen," Jason announced loudly so everyone in the crowd could hear his words clearly. "You are going to get down on your knees and apologize to Bruno properly. Then you are going to volunteer at the local animal shelter for the next 6 months. You need to learn how to treat animals with respect and kindness." Rick looked confused and scared by Jason's unexpected punishment. "But I do not know anything about taking care of animals," he protested weakly. "I have never even owned a pet in my whole life." His admission made the crowd murmur with disgust because it explained why he had no understanding of how cruel his actions were. "That is exactly the problem," Jason replied firmly. "And that is exactly why you need to learn. You will spend every Saturday morning at the animal shelter cleaning cages, feeding dogs and cats, and learning what it means to care for creatures that depend on humans for their survival and happiness." The crowd murmured their approval of Jason's creative punishment. It was fair and educational, and would actually help animals instead of just making Rick suffer. Many people nodded their heads and smiled because they could see the wisdom in making Rick work with the kinds of animals he had hurt. An older woman who volunteered at the animal shelter stepped forward from the crowd. "I work there every weekend, and I will make sure he shows up. and does the work properly, she said with determination. If he tries to skip any days or treat the animals badly, I will call you immediately, Mr. Statham. Rick realized he had no choice but to accept Jason's terms. The alternative was having videos of his animal cruelty shared across the internet forever, which would destroy his reputation and probably cost him his job. He slowly got down on both knees in front of Bruno and looked into the dog's gentle brown eyes. I am truly sorry, Bruno, Rick said, and for the first time his voice sounded genuinely sorry instead of just scared. I was wrong to hurt you. You did not deserve what I did, and I promise I will never hurt another animal again as long as I live. You are a good dog, and I was a bad person. Bruno, being the forgiving creature that dogs naturally are, allowed Rick to gently pet his head. The big German shepherd's tail wagged just slightly as if he understood that Rick was truly sorry for causing him pain. The crowd watched in amazement as Bruno showed the kind of forgiveness that humans often struggle to give. Jason pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to Rick with a serious expression. This has the phone number for the animal shelter, he explained. You will call them first thing Monday morning and tell them that Jason Statham sent you to volunteer. I will be checking to make sure you follow through with this commitment. Rick took the card with shaking hands and looked at the address printed on it. How will you know if I actually show up and do the work, he asked nervously. Jason smiled mysteriously, and the expression made him look exactly like the dangerous characters he played in movies. Trust me, I have ways of finding out, Jason said in a voice that made Rick believe the movie star had connections everywhere. If you try to skip out on this responsibility, I will make sure those videos of you kicking Bruno become the most famous thing on the internet. As the crowd began to break up and people started returning to their normal Saturday morning activities, many neighbors came up to pet Bruno and congratulate Jason for handling the situation so well. The dog was feeling much better now and enjoyed all the attention from his new friends in the community. Pete and Mike had returned on their motorcycles to see what had happened to their former leader. They found Rick sitting alone on the curb, looking defeated and ashamed. When they asked if he wanted to come with them, Rick surprised both men with his answer. You guys go ahead without me, Rick said quietly. I need to think about some serious changes I have to make in my life. For the first time in years, Rick was questioning the way he had been living and treating other people and animals. 6 months later, Rick had completed his volunteer work at the animal shelter and had learned to love and respect all kinds of animals. He even adopted a rescue dog of his own and named him Chance because the dog had given Rick a chance to become a better person. When Jason heard about Rick's transformation, he smiled and gave Bruno an extra treat. The story spread throughout London and beyond, reminding everyone that sometimes the best way to handle bullies is not with violence, but by helping them learn to become better human beings. Bruno continued his peaceful morning walks with Jason and never forgot the day when his owner showed him that love and forgiveness are stronger than anger and revenge.